She said her mother was taken in the dark of night from her bed. Not from the living room, not from the hallway, from her bed. And that one phrase, those 9 words, may be the most important thing anyone has said publicly about this case in 24 days. Because if Savannah Guthrie, a seasoned journalist who has spent her entire career understanding the precise weight of language, chose those words deliberately, then everything investigators, analysts, and the public thought they understood about the night of February 1st needs to be re-examined from the ground up. Welcome to Crime Blackline Archive. Today we're on day 24 of the search for Nancy Guthrie, and today is the day this investigation shifted in ways that investigators, family members, and analysts are still processing in real time. $1 million reward, a partial DNA sample that cannot be loaded into the national database, an FBI command post that just relocated to Phoenix, a detail about hearing aids that reframes the entire sequence of events inside that home, and a phrase spoken by a daughter that may have quietly told us more about this crime than any official press conference has. Let's go through all of it, every thread, every implication, every question that Day 24 opened up, that no one is fully answering yet. Before we get into the evidence, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Blackline Archive and hit that notification bell. We cover real cases, real people, and real investigations. And we don't stop until the full story is told. Now let's talk about what Day 24 actually revealed. On Tuesday, February 24th, 2026, Savannah Guthrie posted a new video to her Instagram. And from the very first seconds, it was clear this wasn't the same type of appeal as the ones that came before. Her voice was measured, her words were chosen carefully. She is, after all, a journalist, a professional, someone who has sat across from presidents, world leaders, and breaking news for decades. She knows exactly what language does and doesn't mean. She knows the difference between a figure of speech and a factual statement. And what she said in that video landed like a weight on everyone following this case. It is day 24 since our mum was taken in the dark of night from her bed. She said it plainly, not as a metaphor, not as poetic language to convey distress, from her bed. We'll come back to those words in depth, because they matter more than almost anything else said publicly in this entire investigation. But first, the reward. Savannah announced that her family is now offering $1 million for any information that leads to the recovery of Nancy Guthrie, combined with the $100,000 already being offered by the FBI and an additional $102,500 from the 88 Crime Tip Fund following a private donation. The total available reward now stands at over $1.2 million. She was clear about what the reward covers: recovery, alive or not. She was clear about anonymity. Anyone can come forward without identifying themselves. And she directed people to the FBI tip line, 1-800-CALL-FBI. Every word of that announcement was deliberate. Every detail was coordinated with law enforcement. This was not a desperate, impulsive gesture from a grieving family. This was a calculated, strategic move made after 23 days of restraint, 23 days of following law enforcement's guidance, 23 days of waiting for a breakthrough that did not come. Here is the context that makes this announcement even more significant. Sources with knowledge of the Guthrie family's thinking told Fox News that Savannah and her family had wanted to offer this reward from the very beginning of the investigation, in the first days, potentially within the first 48 hours. They were discouraged from doing so by authorities. Law enforcement's reasoning, according to reporting and multiple analysts, was strategic. Releasing a maximum reward immediately can flood a tip line with opportunists, fraudulent claims, and noise that buries the real leads. The theory is that you go in incrementally. You start at one number, you build, you filter. For 23 days, the Guthrie family followed that guidance. Then day 23 arrived with no arrests and no confirmed sighting, and they made their own call. No more waiting. The family that had been told to hold back was holding back no longer. Former FBI special agent and hostage negotiator Chip Massey broke down exactly what a $1 million reward does to the psychology of someone who is sitting on information and hasn't yet decided what to do with it. If there's somebody sitting on the fence right now, if they're unsure, $200,000 to give up somebody that's violent, that might have other violent people around them. That may not be enough. $1 million. Now you've got $1 million reasons to call in. Now you have money that can actually protect you. You have means of getting out, of establishing a new life. That is the calculation the family is making. This is no longer purely an ethical decision to come forward. It is now a financial lifeline for someone who might know exactly where Nancy Guthrie is, or exactly who took her. $1.2 million is not just a number. It is, for the right person in the right circumstances, the difference between staying silent and making the call that changes everything. And Massey went further. He pointed out something that investigators have been banking on for weeks, but that the public rarely considers. The suspect is under enormous psychological strain. Not the kind of strain that shows up in FBI profiles or crime statistics. The kind of strain that bleeds through into daily behavior in ways that people around you cannot ignore. Think about getting ready for vacation, Massey said. Think about all the things you have to arrange, all the pressure of that. Now compound that by 1 billion, and you've got the pressure cooker this person is under. Because not only do they have the eyes of this nation on this, I've had interviews with people from multiple countries watching this case.
Hi there.
The entire world knows this case. FBI digital billboards are running across multiple states. $1.2 million is now on the table. And whoever took Nancy Guthrie has been living with that weight every single day since February 1st.
And every hour
Their
and
behavior
minute
has changed.
and second,
People around them have
and every
noticed they're
long
more
night
erratic, more
has
withdrawn,
been
more
agony
unpredictable.
since then.
They're missing work,
Of
they're arguing, they're not the same
worrying
person they were on
about
January
her
31st.
and fearing.
Massey calls it forensic listening, the art and science of analyzing a conversation after it's happened, because words leave clues. Someone in this suspect's life has already had a conversation with them that didn't sit right. A sentence that was almost normal but not quite. A reaction that was almost appropriate but slightly off. That person, according to Massey, is the one the investigation needs. And $1.2 million is now being offered for what they already know. Now, the hearing aids. This detail came from the New York Times, buried deep in a piece about Nancy Guthrie's circle of friends. One of those friends mentioned, almost in passing, that Nancy had recently begun using very powerful hearing aids. And if you understand how hearing aids work, particularly for elderly users who are newer to wearing them, you know exactly what that means at night. You take them out. You don't sleep in them. And when you take out powerful hearing aids and go to sleep, the world goes quiet in ways that it simply doesn't for someone with full hearing. Ordinary ambient sounds disappear. Distant noises become inaudible. The threshold between sleeping and waking shifts entirely. Now layer that with the forced entry detail. Sources, multiple, independent, law enforcement connected, have confirmed to reporters covering this case that there was forced entry at the back of Nancy Guthrie's home. The back door was found open. Someone broke in. And if Nancy Guthrie was asleep in her bed without hearing aids on the night of February 1st, it is entirely possible that she did not hear a single moment of that entry. Not the point of forced access, not footsteps moving through the house, not the FBI Nest camera notification that would have sounded on her phone if the app was active. Not anything at all. She may have had no warning. None. Until he was already in her room. Now layer on one more detail. Nancy Guthrie, at 84, had recently begun using a cane. She had mobility challenges. She required daily medication for ongoing health conditions. She had a pacemaker. The app connected to that pacemaker disconnected from her phone in the early morning hours of February 1st, a detail that investigators flagged immediately in the first days of the case. So picture the full reality of what this person chose as their target. An elderly woman alone, hard of hearing without her aids, with limited mobility in a quiet neighborhood in the pre-dawn hours of a Sunday morning. That is not a random selection. That is intelligence. That is reconnaissance. That is someone who knew exactly what they would and would not encounter inside that home. And that brings us back directly to the 2 visits. We have covered this before on Crime Blackline Archive, But day 24 added new analytical weight to what those two visits actually mean. The first visit, before February 1st, date not publicly confirmed by the FBI, shows the same suspect approaching Nancy Guthrie's front door without the backpack, without the branches, and without completing the approach. He came. He looked. He saw the Nest doorbell camera, and he left. Chip Massey's observation about that first visit is worth sitting with. The way the suspect moved on the surveillance footage, his gait, his body language, the awkward and improvised nature of how he dealt with the camera the second time around, suggests someone who is not a professional. If they were, Massey said, we're talking about black paint duct tape cameras out, they'd be ready to go. Instead, on the second visit, he is picking up branches from the surrounding landscaping and holding them in front of the lens. That is not preparation. That is improvisation. And improvisation, in a crime of this apparent level of planning, is a contradiction that investigators have been sitting with for 3.5 weeks. Because here is the paradox at the center of this case. The suspect demonstrates both sophistication and amateurism in the same sequence of actions. He surveils the location in advance. He identifies an obstacle. He returns with a backpack, with gloves, with what appears to be a weapon. He disconnects the camera. He neutralizes the most obvious piece of technology that could identify him, but then he leaves forensic evidence of a confrontation outside the front of the home. He improvises with branches from a garden. He leaves a glove with his DNA 2 miles away. He does not appear in any law enforcement database. He purchases his gear from Walmart. This is not the profile of a professional criminal with a long history of sophisticated operations. It is, as Massey described it, the profile of someone dangerous but unpracticed. And that unpredictability, that gap between what they planned and what actually happened, is both the source of the evidence trail that exists and the source of the ongoing danger to Nancy Guthrie. Now to the DNA, and the development that hit hardest on day 24 for everyone following the forensic threads of this case. DNA Labs International in Deerfield Beach, Florida, the private lab to which investigators sent biological samples recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home, has returned a finding confirmed by multiple outlets simultaneously. The male DNA recovered from inside the home is only a partial sample. It cannot be uploaded to CODIS. For those unfamiliar, CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, is the FBI's national genetic database, containing profiles from over 19 million convicted offenders, profiles from arrestees in certain states, and profiles from unidentified DNA left at crime scenes across the country. To upload a profile into CODIS, you need a complete, clean, high-quality sample. A partial profile does not meet that standard. That door is currently closed for this particular sample. CBS News added one more layer to this. Their reporting described the DNA from inside the home not just as partial, but as low-level. That terminology carries specific weight in forensic science. A low-level sample may mean a small quantity of biological material. It may mean the sample has degraded over time or through environmental exposure. It may mean it was touch DNA, the microscopic transfer of genetic material that happens through contact with surfaces rather than through more direct biological deposits. And touch DNA, as any forensic analyst will tell you, is the weakest form of evidence in this context, because it can be transferred innocently and indirectly. A contractor who worked on the house, a delivery person who handed something through the door, a family friend who visited weeks before the abduction and touched a surface in passing. None of those scenarios involved the suspect. All of them could produce the same evidentiary result. The strength and origin of that sample, what kind of biological material it came from, and under what circumstances it was deposited, has not been publicly confirmed. And until it is, the forensic picture remains incomplete in ways that matter. But this is not the end of the road. Not even close. Investigators who work with partial DNA samples in the modern era have tools that simply did not exist 15 years ago. Investigative genetic genealogy, IgG, is the methodology that has cracked some of the most consequential cold cases in modern American criminal history. The approach is technically precise. You take the partial profile, you upload it to consumer genealogy platforms, databases where millions of ordinary Americans have voluntarily submitted their genetic information to trace their family history, and you search for familial matches. Not a direct hit on the suspect, a relative, a parent, a sibling. A first cousin, a second cousin, a third cousin who uploaded their DNA years ago with no connection to any crime whatsoever. From that match, investigators begin constructing a family tree. They identify all males in that tree who fall within the relevant age and geographic range. They systematically eliminate individuals. Wrong age, wrong location, verified alibis, confirmed female relatives who don't fit the suspect profile. The group narrows. Then comes the physical investigative work, surveillance, waiting. Collecting discarded DNA from a cigarette, from a coffee cup, from a pizza box thrown in a public trash can, and confirming the match against the original sample. That is precisely how investigators identified Joseph James DeAngelo as the Golden State Killer in 2018, after decades in which every conventional investigative method had failed. The same technology, the same methodology, is now almost certainly being applied to the partial sample recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home. The glove recovered approximately 2 miles from the crime scene, the one that visually appears to match the type worn by the suspect in the FBI surveillance footage, produced its own DNA profile, which was submitted to CODIS and returned with no match. That glove matters for a different reason now. It may become a second parallel track for the genealogical work, a second sample from a second location, potentially providing additional genetic material to cross-reference against the sample from inside the house. 2 separate samples pointing toward the same individual is a significantly stronger foundation than one. Something else happened on day 24 that has not received enough attention. Activity was observed outside Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina foothills. Sheriff's deputies arrived unannounced, activated their emergency lights in the driveway, walked the perimeter and moved around to the back of the property. Reporters on scene got no explanation. And then no trespassing signs went up around the perimeter of Nancy Guthrie's property. The most likely interpretation, the extraordinary volume of volunteer searchers and true crime community members who have descended on the Tucson area, has resulted in unauthorized individuals approaching or entering the crime scene. Sheriff Nanos had explicitly asked the public weeks ago to obtain permission before entering private property during the search effort. The signs that appeared on day 24 may be the consequence of that request being ignored, and of investigators needing to protect the integrity of a crime scene that is, despite everything, still active. Then there is the FBI command post. Arizona Family's Brianna Whitney reported that the FBI has moved its central operational command for the Guthrie case from its forward position in Tucson to its permanent headquarters in Phoenix. The FBI's stated reasoning, a larger facility, better suited to the operational scale of a month-long major investigation. The agency was explicit that investigative teams remain active and present on the ground in Tucson, and that the move does not represent any scaling back of resources dedicated to the case. Chip Massey offered perspective. Investigations evolve. The first phase of a major abduction case is rapid response. Field teams, physical searches, canvassing, tip processing, real-time surveillance analysis. The second phase is methodical. It is laboratory work, genealogical research, behavioral analysis, source development. It does not require 300 agents in a forward command post. It requires the right analysts in the right facility, running the right threads. The relocation to Phoenix is not a retreat. It is a transition
in the dark of
from
night
crisis response to sustained investigative pressure.
And every
that sustained
hour
pressure
and
has
minute
already been
and
producing
second
leads that have not yet been
and
made
every
public.
long night has been
Chip Massey
agony
referenced the
since
gun
then
shop investigation,
of
the detail that emerged weeks into the
worrying
case,
about her,
showing FBI agents visiting
fearing
firearms dealers across the Tucson area, carrying lists of between 24 and 40 names, asking whether those individuals had purchased the specific model of weapon or holster visible in the surveillance footage. That gives me a lot of confidence that they are developing new leads all the time, Massey said. They might be narrowing down those leads. They might have a cluster of people of interest that they're focused on now. 40 names is not a cold investigation. 40 names is a funnel. And somewhere inside that funnel, if the methodology holds, is the man on that front porch. Let's return to the phrase that opened this investigation on day 24, taken from her bed. Early in the case, in the very first week, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos used those exact words at a press conference. Nancy Guthrie was taken from her bed. The statement made national headlines. And then the sheriff walked it back, saying he had been speaking figuratively, that he hadn't intended for the language to be taken literally. The press accepted the correction. The phrase faded from coverage. And then, 23 days later, Savannah Guthrie, a journalist with decades of professional experience in precision language, sat in front of a camera and said it again. Our mum was taken in the dark of night from her bed. She was not quoting the sheriff. She was not echoing a figure of speech. She was making a statement. And analysts who cover this case have been sitting with that statement ever since. If it is literal, if Nancy Guthrie was asleep in her bedroom when this man entered her home, then the range of possible motives narrows significantly and sharply. This was not a burglary interrupted. This was not an opportunistic crime that escalated. This was a man who came into a home in the pre-dawn hours of a Sunday morning, moved through the house, found an 84-year-old woman in her bed, and took her. That is abduction. That is targeted. That is the act of someone who came specifically for her, and for nothing else. Here is what we know with certainty on day 24 of the search for Nancy Guthrie. She is 84 years old. She lived alone in a quiet neighborhood in Tucson, Arizona. She was, by every account from people who loved her, sharp, warm, deeply engaged in her faith and her community. On February 1st, 2026, a masked and prepared man came to her home, a home he had already visited once before to surveil, and she was taken. The pacemaker signal went silent in the pre-dawn hours. The doorbell camera was physically obstructed. Forensic evidence of a confrontation was found outside the front of the home. Her DNA profile, her daily medication, her pacemaker, her hearing aids, the intimate details of an 84-year-old woman's life are now the framework of a federal abduction investigation involving the FBI, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, forensic laboratories in Florida, and investigators who are building family trees from partial DNA in the hope of finding a name. 40,000 tips. One glove with a DNA profile. One partial DNA sample from inside the house that cannot be run through national databases but may be run through genealogical ones. 2 photographs of the same suspect at the same front door on 2 different days. $1.2 million attached to any information that leads to her recovery. And a daughter who stood in front of a camera on day 24 and said what no daughter should ever have to say, that she has made peace with the possibility that her mother may already be gone, but that she still needs to know where she is. She still needs to bring her home, whatever that homecoming looks like. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The reward is $1.2 million. Anonymous tips are accepted. Somewhere someone knows who this man is. Somewhere someone has already had a conversation that didn't quite make sense. A behavior that changed on February 1st and hasn't gone back to normal since. A face they recognize in that surveillance footage that they haven't let themselves fully acknowledge yet. Savannah Guthrie spoke to that person directly in her video. Please be the light in the dark. That was the phrase she used. Please be the light in the dark. If this investigation moved you, subscribe to Crime Blackline Archive and hit that like button. Drop your theory in the comments below. Do you believe Savannah was speaking literally when she said her mother was taken from her bed? Does the hearing aid detail change how you understand what happened inside that home? And do you think the $1.2 million reward will be what finally breaks this case open? Let me know what you think. And remember, this is not a story. Nancy Guthrie is a real person. Her family is living this in real time every single day. These are real lives and real mysteries, and they deserve to be remembered.